Sandman Volume 6, Fables and Reflections, written by Neil Gaiman, art by Bryan Talbot, Stan Woch, P. Craig Russell, Shawn McManus, John Watkiss, Jill Thompson, Duncan Eagleson, Kent Williams. A lot of names in this one. Alright, Sandman Volume 6, Fables and Reflections. This volume is very different and interesting because it contains 9 individual self-contained stories. There is no story arc that spans multiple issues. Each issue is a one-and-done story. There is some connective tissue between various issues, though. When 4 of the issues came out, they were labeled with the word Distant Mirrors, and each of these stories deals with an emperor in history, and Distant Mirrors is in reference to how the past reflects upon the current day. 3 of the issues were labeled with the word Convergence on them, and each of these issues have to deal with characters of different times and places coming together to tell stories. My favorite issues in this volume are the Song of Orpheus issue, which is Morpheus' son is Orpheus, and we get his origin story. So that one is really good and important because we have a lot of the Endless showing up in that issue, and we really learn about Morpheus and Orpheus's relationship. And the final issue in this volume, Ramadan, is one of the most celebrated issues of Sandman. The artwork is beautiful and the story is very interesting and thought-provoking. So, let's dive into it. Volume 6, Fables and Reflections. The first issue is from the Vertigo Preview number 1, Fear of Falling. This is a short 10-page story. A man named Todd Farber has wrote a play, but he seems to fear failure. So he tells a woman named Janet to tell all the other actors and everyone on set that the play is canceled. That night, Todd has a dream where he is climbing a rock face. Now he has a fear of falling off this cliff in this dream, which is also kind of a metaphor for his play failing in his real life. In his dream, he talks to Morpheus, and Morpheus tells him that there are 3 things that can happen when you fall in a dream. You can wake up, you can die, but there's also a third alternative. And Todd, in his dream, he falls off that rocky cliff, and as he's falling, he begins to fly. So sometimes when you fall in a dream, you fly. And Todd, he woke up, and the next day, Todd, he's on the play stage, he has a new lease on life, and he will attempt to make his play a success. Issue 31, Distant Mirrors, 3 Septembers and a January. This issue is inspired by a real man named Joshua Abraham Norton. The year is 1859. We are in San Francisco, and we see this man, Joshua Abraham Norton. He was a respected businessman, but after some wrong decisions, it has wiped him out financially, and he is poor now, and he is contemplating suicide. He has entered despair's realm. Despair of the Endless is in the room, waiting for Joshua to come to her fully. Despair is then visited by Morpheus. Despair invited him. Despair has a game or challenge for Morpheus. She wants to see if Morpheus can redeem this man, this Joshua, stop him from giving into despair, desire, or delirium, keep him from their realms, before eventually dying and being visited by their oldest sister, Death. She mocks Morpheus and says, "Life has hurt Joshua. What can you do with your little dreams? Redeem him?" Morpheus resists at first, but then decides to accept the challenge. Morpheus, in a waking dream, persuades Joshua to crown himself the first emperor of the United States. The US doesn't have a king or an emperor. Joshua will be the first. Why not him? Joshua He loves the idea, and he writes a proclamation and sends it to the local newspaper, and he declares himself king. The local newspaper, reading the proclamation, thinks it's silly. Joshua even signed it Norton I, Emperor of the United States. The newspaper decided to publish it though. We see Joshua now walking down the street with pride and purpose. He seems happy. He is safely staying clear of despair's realm for now. Joshua has a run-in with famous novelist Mark Twain, who finds Joshua highly entertaining. They have dinner together in this restaurant. While they are eating, Morpheus is there watching, and he gets visited by Delirium. Delirium wonders if Joshua should be in her realm. He is kind of delirious and insane a little bit after all. But she concedes that he is so sane, except about being emperor, of course. He is not mine, is he? His madness keeps him sane. It is 1875 now. Joshua has become somewhat of a tourist attraction in San Francisco. He is wearing an emperor's uniform donated by city council, and he is even selling his own currency, which was actually accepted at many restaurants in San Francisco at the time. People somewhat seem to respect and like him. They even call him Your Highness. A Chinese man comes and greets Joshua by saying, "Your wisdom, your imperial magnificence, son of heaven, I greet you, I who am not worthy to stand in your shadow." The Chinese man summons Joshua to a famous saloon called the Cobwebs Palace. There, Joshua is visited by an eccentric man named the King of Pain. The King of Pain is actually dead, but somehow is alive right now. The King of Pain is actually working for Desire of the Endless. Desire doesn't want Morpheus to win their little challenge, so she sent this King of Pain to tempt Joshua. The King of Pain asks Joshua, if he is an emperor, then isn't he missing an empress? A wife? He's going to need offspring after all. There has to be a Norton II and Norton III. The King of Pain tempts Joshua in an effort to get him to give in to desire. He shows him pictures of many potential queens for him, beautiful women. He points to one woman in particular and says that this woman is all his. All he has to do is desire her. Doesn't he want a big house? Give the word and the building will start tomorrow. Joshua is confused. He asks, "I don't understand, sir. Are you expecting me to make a deal with you?" The King of Pain answers, "Oh, no. Well, only a little one. Look at her. She's beautiful. She could be yours. All you have to do is want her. All you have to do is want." Joshua is not interested though. He says that he has everything he wants now. He has enough money to get by. The people treat him well. He wants for nothing. Joshua explains about the time that he was arrested for lunacy, and they released him. And the judge told him, he said, "Mr. Norton has shed no blood, robbed no one, and despoiled no country," which is more than can be said for most fellows in the king line. Joshua then tells the King of Pain, "I am the Emperor of the United States, Pain. I am content to be what I am. What more than that could any man desire?" Mr. Pain grows angry at Joshua's refusal. Doesn't he want woman, power, money? Joshua tells Mr. Pain that he should go, and Mr. Pain goes back to a carriage outside that is carrying Desire, and he tells her that he has failed. Morpheus is in the carriage, talking with Desire, and they discuss. Desire is dumbfounded how Morpheus has pulled this off. She says, "How did you do that, Dream? Norton lusts after women. I can feel it. He wants it so badly. There was no way that he could say no. He had no protection. He should have been mine." And Morpheus answers, "He has his dignity, sister brother. He is, after all, an emperor." And Desire replies, "Don't give me that shit, Dream. He's no king. He's a crazy man with a cockeyed fantasy. Pain, get your dead ass in here. We're going." And with that, Desire storms off. In 1880, Joshua dies of a heart attack and is visited by death. Morpheus and Despair also arrive, and despair tells Morpheus that he has won the bet. And Morpheus replies, "So it would appear, my sister." Morpheus then gives despair a gift, a little statue of Joshua that they sell in town as a memento for travelers. Joshua and Death, they then walk off, and Joshua comments to Death, "I must confess, I've always wondered what lay beyond life, my dear." And Death answers, "Yeah, everybody wonders, and sooner or later everybody gets to find out." And the ending text reads, "Joshua Norton was buried on Sunday the 10th of January 1880. 10,000 people filed past the body as it lay in state, and his funeral cortege was over 2 miles long. His burial was marked by a total eclipse of the sun. He was the first and last Emperor of the United States of America." Issue 29, Distant Mirrors, Thermidor. In Volume 2, Issue 13, Men of Good Fortune, we had Morpheus meeting Hob Gadling. Well, one of their meetings took place in 1789, and there, Morpheus met a woman named Johanna Constantine. She was an ancestor of John Constantine. At the time, she thought Morpheus was some sort of demon with powers, and she attempted to extract power and wealth from him, although it didn't really work out for her. Well, in this issue, it is now 1794. 5 years later, Morpheus has seeked out this Johanna Constantine as he has a mission for her. Johanna Constantine is actually a very capable woman. She is an 18th century noblewoman, a spy, a scholar, a con artist, and a magic user. Morpheus has promised her something that is in his power to give her, although what that specifically is has not yet been determined. In exchange, though, Morpheus wants Johanna to return with the head of his son, Orpheus. Morpheus says he cannot involve himself directly in the matter. It is a family affair. Johanna Constantine, she agrees. Now Orpheus, he is Morpheus's son that Morpheus had with the Greek muse known as Calliope. We saw Calliope in Volume 3. She was captured by a writer who abused her so that he could write great novels. Well, Orpheus, he was also a real figure in Greek mythology. Orpheus's singing was supposedly so beautiful that animals and even trees and rocks moved about him in dance. And when he sings, he can sometimes influence or charm people. Orpheus, he is still alive, but now he just exists as a severed head. We will actually get his origin story later on in this volume and find out how Orpheus got into this predicament where he is just a head. But that will be later though. For now, Morpheus just asks this Johanna to retrieve his son. Johanna Constantine, accepting the mission, travels to France to retrieve Orpheus, as that is where his head is. The French Revolutionary War is happening right now though. It is in a phase called the Reign of Terror, where the political figure known as Maximilien Robespierre is carrying out many massacres and numerous public executions, especially by way of the guillotine, which is that device that chops people's heads off. Apparently it was invented in France and they loved using it. So France, right now, is not the safest place to travel to. Johanna in France is traveling under the fake name of Jean Beauchance. She breaks into a crypt and steals the head of Orpheus. But now the hard part is getting out of France and returning Orpheus to safety. She goes to a place to sleep for the night. She talks to the head of Orpheus and tells him that they can't leave Paris until tomorrow morning when the gates are opened. Later on, though, Johanna is arrested by some soldiers. They know she has the head of Orpheus, and they want it back. She has apparently hidden it, though, and she refuses to tell them where it is. She is brought as a prisoner to Maximilien Robespierre's palace so she can talk. As she waits in her room as a prisoner, she sees a super messed up, grotesque puppet show on the street, where they attach ropes to the dead bodies of the guillotined people with no heads and make them prance around. Finally, Johanna has a meeting with Maximilian Robespierre himself. He knows all about her true identity, how she's a spy, a magic user, and an enemy of France, and he wants the head that she stole. Robespierre says you are in possession of something that belongs to the people of France, an object of superstition and decadence, and I want it back. Robespierre wants to destroy the head. He is remaking France and creating a world of pure reason, and he will not have an object of superstition at large in his country. It threatens France, and if it threatens France, it is his business. Johanna, who is critical of Robespierre's violent way of remaking France, quips back to him, "So I have seen. You will save France if you have to kill every child, woman, and man in the country to do it." Robespierre threatens Johanna to tell him where the head is, but she refuses. Robespierre leaves. His men will continue to search for the head, but he hopes Johanna will soon change her mind and tell him the location of Orpheus. Johanna that night dreams and talks with Morpheus. She explains her somewhat dire situation and how can she possibly get out of it now. Well, Morpheus and his raven at the time think on it, and then eventually they suggest to Johanna that she get Orpheus to use his power of song. Remember I mentioned earlier that Orpheus has this great singing voice that has power over others? The next day, Johanna agrees to show this Robespierre where she has hidden the head of Orpheus. She leads him and his men down into the dungeons where we see all of these other severed heads from all the other bodies that have been guillotined. What better place to keep the severed head of Orpheus than among all of these other severed heads? Johanna tells Orpheus to sing to them. She then puts her hands over her own ears to earmuff them and protect her from Orpheus's singing voice. Orpheus he then sings. He sings a soul-searing song about senselessly spilt blood, about freedom, liberty, and love. And somehow, all the other dead heads there join him to form a chorus. And when Orpheus's song was done, he had turned Robespierre and his fellow men into broken men. And Johanna was able to walk right out with the head of Orpheus in tow. Days later, Johanna left Paris and escaped, and shortly after that, Maximilian Robespierre and his fellow men failed to speak in convincing ways to the people of France. They no longer had their confidence. Previously, when Robespierre spoke, he was listened to with awe or silence or fear, and now he was at a loss for words. And eventually, he was beheaded too himself, by way of the guillotine. Almost ironically because he was such a lover of the guillotine, and then it was used on him. Johanna brought Orpheus's head to a remote Greek island called Naxos. This is where Orpheus stayed for many years before his head was initially stolen. And Morpheus has an order of priests who are charged to take care of Orpheus there. Johanna and Orpheus say their goodbyes, and eventually Johanna will have to have a meeting with Morpheus where they will discuss what she will receive as payment. Issue 38, Convergence, The Hunt. We see a grandfather. He is some sort of immigrant from some unsaid country. He is talking to his granddaughter Celeste. Celeste is a Michael Jackson-loving, MTV-watching, very Americanized teenage girl. The grandfather is telling her a story of the old country, and throughout the story, the two of them have an amusing back and forth as the granddaughter will often interrupt her grandfather's telling of the story and question things that are happening. We see a man named Vasily in the woods. He runs into an old gypsy woman. She says that she is hungry. Vasily gives her some rabbit that he just hunted. The gypsy woman has a sack of various treasures she is peddling. She has something called the Emerald Heart of Koschei the Deathless. She has another object called a Cloak of Night. She has another object called a Drum Inescapable, each of them with their own fantastical powers, as well as many other things. Vasily's father returns, though, and pulls him away from the gypsy woman. He later tells his son that you must not talk to the folk of the forest. They mean us harm. He then tells his son that the stuff that she's peddling is just valueless trinkets. The next day, though, Vasily returns to the gypsy woman. She gives him a locket with a picture of the Duke's daughter, and the Duke's daughter is extremely beautiful. The gypsy woman then tells Vasily to look into her eyes. She is going to tell him his fortune. But as she looks into Vasily's eyes, she gets scared and she backs away. She says, "What? Whoa, what are you? Keep away from me." And she runs away, frightened. Vasily eventually decided to leave home while his father was out hunting one day. So Vasily, he left, and he found the gypsy woman in the woods, and she was dead, bleeding out. Well, Vasily grabbed her sack of valuable goods and continued onwards. As he was traveling, he eventually came across Lucian, whom we know as the librarian in Morpheus's dream world. Well, apparently the gypsy woman had a book in her bag, and now that book is in the possession of Vasily, and Lucian needs that book back. Lucian asks Vasily what does he want in return for the book. Vasily shows Lucian the picture of the beautiful Duke's daughter, and he says that he wants her. Lucian replies that he cannot give him that. Vasily says very well, and he walks on. The granddaughter, then interrupting her grandfather, asks, "The man, the librarian, is he one of the people? Was he a fairy or something? I don't believe in fairies." And the grandfather answers, "Of course you don't believe in fairies. You're 15. You think I believed in fairies at 15? Took me until I was at least 140, 150 maybe. Anyway, he wasn't a fairy. He was a librarian, all right?" And the granddaughter replies, "It all sounds suspiciously postmodern to me, Grandpa. Are you sure this really is a story from the old country?" And the grandpa continues, "Listen, blood of my blood, although I'm a hard man to anger and I love you deeply, if you interrupt me again, so help me, I'll rip out your throat with my teeth." And the granddaughter replies, "Sorry, Grandpa." Now, to me, telling your granddaughter you're going to rip her throat out with your teeth could seem intense, but perhaps it is just light teasing. Anyway, the grandfather continues the story. Lucian, he met up with Vasily again later, and offered him a sack full of gold now for the book. But Vasily still says he wants the girl and that Lucian knows the price he wants. Walking through the forest, Vasily then comes across a deer, and he chases the deer. He's trying to hunt it. But the deer gets tackled by a girl. She beat Vasily to the deer. Well, the girl and Vasily walk back to her camp together. And when they arrive, Vasily looks at all the others in the camp, and it's explained that they asked him no questions, he gave them no answers, and he had never seen so many of the people before. But they were his kin, and he was not afraid of them. Notice the use of the people, although we are never told explicitly who the people refers to. In the camp, Vasily sees an old woman named Baba Yaga there. Baba Yaga is a folklore character. She is arguably one of the most famous witches in all of literature, and she has appeared in hundreds, if not thousands, of folktales in Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, predating the 18th century. She is often a supernatural being who appears as a deformed or ferocious-looking old woman. In Slavic culture, Baba Yaga lived in a hut usually described as standing on chicken legs. Well, we can see that hut in the background here. So Baba Yaga and Vasily talk, and eventually Vasily trades the old woman the emerald heart of Koschei of the Deathless. He has it in his sack. It used to belong to that gypsy woman, and in exchange, Baba Yaga takes Vasily directly to the Duke's palace. She flies him right over there. Vasily, he knocks on the door of the palace, and he is greeted by a little man. Vasily explains he wants to meet the Duke's daughter. The little man leads Vasily downstairs to the cellar. He tells him to head through the door and the lady will be arriving shortly. But the little man tricked Vasily, and as soon as Vasily walked into the room, the little man shut the door behind him, trapping Vasily there in that cellar. Well, Vasily, he's trapped now, and Lucian shows up and offers Vasily his freedom from this trapped cellar in exchange for the book. But Vasily explains to Lucian, "I am of the people, man. What I seek, I find. What I hunt, I take. I can hide it in a shadow. My teeth are sharp enough to cut bone. I run on 4 legs as easily as 2. I am kin to Dwaro and Nightgaunt. I owe allegiance to none born, and I fear nothing. I want the woman." Well, Lucian, kind of out of options here, decides to invite Vasily into the dreaming. And in the dreaming, they meet Morpheus, and Lucian explains about the book and the girl. Morpheus, he then smiles when he hears the story of what this Vasily wants. And he tells Vasily to give Lucian the book and that Morpheus will meet his price. So Vasily gives Lucian the book. The book is called The Merry Comedy of the Redemption of Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. It is perhaps an unwritten book from Lucian's library, and he wanted it returned. Remember, Lucian's library contains all books ever written, as well as those not written and those that only live on in dreams. Morpheus and Lucian take Vasily to meet the Duke's daughter in her bedroom. They arrive in the bedroom and she is sleeping. Vasily creeps over to her and touches her shoulder, and she wakes up. She was beautiful, pale, fragile. Well, he gives her the locket with her picture in it, but then Vasily turns around and talks to Morpheus and says, "I'm hungry. Take me away from here, please." And that was it. They disappeared into the dreaming, and they ate some food, and they had a little bit of a feast. Eventually, Lucian asked Vasily, "What about the Duke's daughter?" But Vasily shook his head and said nothing. Morpheus, he knew though. He knew that wishes are sometimes best left ungranted. So the moral of this part of the story is that this Vasily, he wanted to meet or be with this beautiful Duke's daughter so much, but when he finally was with her and in her presence, he kind of no longer wanted her, and he realized that he would be happier with his own people. So as Morpheus said, sometimes wishes are best left ungranted. Or to put it in another way, you always want what you can't have, but when you have it, maybe then you realize you never really wanted it. Vasily then woke up in the forest, and one night in early spring, when the crescent moon hung sharp and white in the sky, he ran through the woods in the shape of a wolf. Vasily is actually some sort of werewolf. The werewolves are his people. And that night, he smelled the scent of another female werewolf from across the woods. It was the very woman that beat him to the deer earlier. Well, he found her, and the two of them hunted for hours, and then eventually they made love, switching from wolf shape to human shape. And then the grandfather, now in the present day, talking to his granddaughter, finishing the story, he says, "And the people came from hundreds of leagues around for the wedding, and they lived happily together until death parted them." The granddaughter tells her grandfather, "And that's it, huh?" It's kind of a sexist story, Grandpa. The granddaughter is angry. She thinks that this story was just some sort of subtle way of her grandfather trying to dissuade her from dating her current boyfriend who her parents don't fully approve of. The granddaughter says, "I know what this story's about. My parents put you up to this, didn't they? It's about Christopher, isn't it? It's about my boyfriend." And the grandfather replies, "Why would it be about your boyfriend?" And the granddaughter continues, "Because he's not one of the people, he's one of them." Jesus, you're so transparent, Grandpa. Look, we don't live in the forest anymore. This is New Jersey, and I can go out with whoever I want. And the grandfather says it was a true story. The granddaughter replies, "True? Give me a break." The grandfather says it's a story of the people. Don't you want to know where you come from? Who you are? The granddaughter says, "Not really. It's sexist, it's insular, and the moral is that the people are happy with the people." Big surprise. I knew I should have watched TV. At least TV doesn't try to pretend that we're still living 500 years ago. The grandfather, a little saddened, says, "But it wasn't about your boyfriend. It wasn't really about the people. It was about what he saw when he looked at the sleeping woman, why he turned his back on her. It was about dreams." My fault. I thought you'd want to hear the story. You watch your television. Your parents will be home soon. The granddaughter says, "Good night, Grandpa." The grandfather, though, he then says before he leaves the room, "I wish you could have known your grandmother. She was an amazing woman. She knew the value of things, but she never let me forget that she'd beaten me to the deer. Good night." And that is the end of the issue. The grandfather is actually Vasily from the story. He is the boy that was the werewolf, and he has apparently been alive for hundreds of years. Issue 30, Distant Mirrors, August. We meet the dwarf known as Lysias. He was summoned by Emperor Caesar Augustus. Augustus was actually born with the name Gaius Octavius, but Julius Caesar was his great-uncle, and Julius Caesar adopted him, hence Augustus taking the name Caesar Augustus. Augustus is about 70 years old at this point, and he is emperor of Rome, and one day a year he lives as a nobody, as a beggar, and that day is today. Lysias the dwarf meets with Augustus, and together they rub some mixture that Lysias has created of soap and vinegar that will give their skin an appearance of being burned and ulcerated, which should make begging easier. It will also hide Augustus's appearance from his people. Augustus also applies an eye patch on himself to further hide his appearance. The two go walking through the city and sit on some stairs, and there they beg, with a bowl out collecting coins. Almost this entire issue takes place with just the two of them talking. Lysias and Augustus talk about many things. They discuss Julius Caesar, who was Augustus's adopted father. They discuss family. Lysias's family was embarrassed by him being a dwarf. They discuss the gods and if they really existed. Augustus says the gods exist. He has seen them. He references the seven, meaning dream and the rest of the endless. Lysias asks why they are out here begging anyway. Why is Augustus doing this? Augustus says he will explain later. Augustus talks of his great-uncle Julius Caesar. He explains that the first time that he met Caesar was at his grandmother's funeral. He saw him next when he was 16 years old, and Caesar was campaigning in Spain, and Augustus was to join him. Augustus says that he was my uncle, you see. He was the greatest man in the world. He was my hero, and he was Caesar. I spent some time with him in Spain. He was to have taken me on his next expedition. He planned to have me always by his side. Then Augustus explains how Caesar died, and he had named him Augustus as his heir. And he was 18 years old then, and he went to go avenge Julius Caesar. Lysias comments, "Oh, you must have loved him." But Augustus answers, "No, I hated him." They talk some more, and we learn that at some point Augustus found some books of prophecy, and one prophecy foretold of a future where Rome would crumble in a few centuries. And there was a different possible future where Rome took over the entire earth and the empire lasted far into the future. Augustus, he chose one of these future prophecies and burned and rewrote the other, hoping it would never pass. Now, we know from history that the Roman Empire did not take over the entire earth, and it did not last. So it appears that perhaps Augustus chose the downfall of Rome. But why did he choose this prophecy? Augustus's motive for choosing the downfall of Rome was perhaps driven by his dislike for his great-uncle predecessor, Julius Caesar. Why did he hate Caesar so much? Well, when Augustus was 16 years old, apparently Caesar raped and abused him and sodomized him. And as Caesar was doing it, he would say to him, "Do what I say and I will adopt you as my son. Do what I say and you will rule when I am gone. Do what I say and the world will be yours." Well, Augustus did what he was told. By the way, I googled this, and apparently it has not been historically proven that Caesar raped Augustus, although it has not been unproven either, so it's kind of ambiguous if this actually happened. One day, Augustus had a dream where Morpheus visited him, and Augustus asked Morpheus for a story, and Morpheus obliged. Morpheus said, "A story, very well. There was a child who loved and respected his uncle, and who feared the gods. His uncle was a great general, and the boy counted the days until he would be old enough to ride out to follow his uncle to war. But when he was 16 years old and in his own eyes already a man, the boy set off to be with his uncle, to learn the arts of conquest. And then on his first night in his uncle's camp, weak from illness and excitement, the boy lay in his tent. But something bad happened to him that night. Augustus, in horror, yells at Morpheus, "No! How dare you? Who are you?" Augustus was shocked that Morpheus knew of his abuse by the hands of his uncle, and how it scarred him, and how he awoke every night screaming. Augustus secretly wishes for the downfall of Rome, but he feared that the various gods of Rome would not be happy with him, and he did not wish them to know his plans. So Morpheus told Augustus, "For one day every year do not be emperor, be a beggar. Go to the marketplace and beg for coppers, and plan your course on that day, when the gods will not be watching." Back to Augustus and Lysias. So this is why Augustus wanted to beg in the street this day, to follow Morpheus's suggestion, to hide as a beggar so he could think. And at the end of the day, Augustus and Lysias said their goodbyes and they parted ways. 50 years later, long after Augustus died, Lysias the dwarf was writing in a journal and recounting the story of the day he spent with the Emperor of Rome. He says that he spotted Augustus in the market 2 years after the day that they spent together. And there he was, being a beggar once again. And Lysias tossed him a copper, and Augustus smiled at him. After Augustus died, he appointed Tiberius as his successor, and since then all the rulers of Rome have been successively evil, mad, or foolish, or all three. Perhaps this is how Augustus achieved his goals of the downfall of Rome. The dwarf never did learn about Augustus's big secret, though, about why he was angry and scared. Issue 39, Convergence, Soft Places. The term soft places refers to the places where the border between dreams and reality has eroded or has not yet fully formed. It is often found in the unexplored areas of the world that have yet to be discovered. They were more prevalent in history when less of the world was known and mapped out, and often explorers would drift into them, and they would be lost forever, never to be found again. One thing you must know is that in the soft places, time is fluid. So in this issue, characters from different time periods are interacting with each other. In the year 1273, the explorer Marco Polo has gotten lost in the desert. He enters the dream world, although he doesn't realize it at first. In the sandy dream world, Marco Polo runs into Rustichello of Pisa. Rustichello is a real-life historical figure who would go on to write the autobiography of Marco Polo. While the two of them, they travel around and eventually run into Fiddler's Green in the soft places. Only this Fiddler's Green is from 1992. Marco Polo asks if Fiddler's Green has seen his father or his uncle. He's still trying to find his way home. Fiddler's Green hasn't seen them, though. They share some wine and food, and Marco Polo, starting to figure things out, asks Fiddler's Green if this is a dream, and Fiddler's Green answers, "Oh yes." They all share some stories. Marco Polo tells of his father's experience with the great Kubla Khan. Rustichello writes down the story afterwards so it will be remembered. While they are drinking and eating food, Fiddler's Green gets visited by some other people that have been lost in this desert soft place for thousands of years. They've been searching for a way to get back to the real world. They ask Fiddler's Green for help and for information, but he says he can't be of much help. They will have to talk to his master. So they eventually leave. Now Marco Polo asks Fiddler's Green, "What is this place?" And Fiddler's Green explains what the soft place is. He says, "Time at the edge of the dreaming is softer than elsewhere. And here in the soft places it loops and whirls on itself. In the soft places where the border between dreams and reality is eroded or is not yet formed. Time, it's like throwing a stone into a pool. It casts ripples. And that's where we are." Eventually Fiddler's Green says bye to them. And Marco Polo and Rustichello talk further, but eventually Rustichello leaves as well, and Marco Polo is all alone. Marco Polo, he's running around the desert, and eventually he spots Morpheus walking. Marco Polo desperately needs Morpheus's help. Only, this is the Morpheus from 1988. This is Morpheus when he just escaped from captivity from being held by Alex Burgess. This is Morpheus immediately after Volume 1, Issue 1. He is in a very weakened state, and he needs to get back to his castle to recuperate. Well, Marco Polo offers Morpheus some water, and Morpheus, in his weakened state, accepts it and drinks it. Morpheus then walks and says he'll be on his way. Marco Polo pleads with Morpheus to help him. Morpheus says, "If you come in, you do not go out again." Marco Polo pleads some more. He doesn't want to be trapped in here. Eventually Morpheus decides, because Marco Polo gave him some water and knows what it feels like to be trapped, he will help him. But he tells Marco Polo he will have to go the long way. Morpheus tells Marco Polo to hold out his hands, and Morpheus pours some sand into Marco Polo's hands, and with that, Marco plunges into the sand. And when he eventually wakes up, he is back in the real world, in his time in 1273, and he is face down in the sand, and he is retrieved out of the sand by his father. And Marco Polo tries to remember his time in the soft places, but it is hazy to him now, like most dreams sometimes are. And Marco Polo, he just believes it was all a dream, and him and his father then walk off. Sandman Special, The Song of Orpheus. This issue is one of the most important in this volume. We will learn the story of Orpheus, Morpheus's son. The story begins on Orpheus's wedding day in ancient Greek times. Firstly, though, let's do a little character breakdown. There is Orpheus and his wife-to-be, Eurydice. There is also all the endless coming together. Dream, death, destiny, desire, despair, delirium, and destruction. This is the first time we will actually get to see destruction in this series. This was before he abandoned his realm. There is Calliope, Morpheus' wife at the time, and the mother of his child. There is also this hairy guy named Aristeos, who is Orpheus' friend. This story is based on a story from Greek mythology. So it is Orpheus' wedding day, and he is happy. He is very much in love with his bride-to-be, Eurydice. Orpheus arrives and greets his various guests. There is his mom, Calliope. There is his bride, Eurydice. There is Orpheus' aunt, Death. And not only that, the entire endless family have come for this. So we see Death, Delirium, Destiny, Desire, Despair, and in a big suit of shiny metal armor, Destruction. Orpheus introduces them all to his bride-to-be, and all of the endless wish Orpheus and Eurydice well. Not Destiny, though. Destiny says, "I greet you, Eurydice, on the day of your wedding." And Orpheus says, "Uncle, won't you wish us well?" And Destiny replies, I am Destiny, I do not wish, I know. What must happen will happen. That is the way of it. But the priests await you, children, your wedding begins. Destiny, he knows the future, remember? So this is kind of an ominous sign of things to come. Well, the wedding begins, and they say their vows, and Orpheus and Eurydice kiss, and they are married. And now it has come time for the party. As the party goes on for a while, most of the Endless have left, but Death has stayed. And Orpheus comments to Death, my other uncles and aunts have left. I wish they could have also stayed for the party. And Death continues, they had things to do, Orpheus. And Orpheus says, but you stayed. And Death replies, I also have things to do, my nephew. Eventually, the hairy guy, Aristeos, asks Eurydice to come somewhere privately with him so they can talk. And while they are away, secluded, he attempts to sexually assault her. Eurydice runs away, and as she is running, she gets bitten by a snake on her leg, and she dies. And Aristeos calls Orpheus over and he's apologizing that she's dead, and Death comes over for Eurydice as well. Time passes. Orpheus still can't get over the death of his wife. He goes to visit his dad Morpheus in Morpheus's dream world at his castle. Orpheus asks his dad to help him retrieve his wife from the underworld, from Hades. And Morpheus says that his son is being foolish. He needs to move on. And Orpheus, angry, tells his dad, very well then, I am no longer your son. And he storms off. Orpheus later on goes and talks with his uncle, Destruction. Orpheus comments that if he can't be alive with his wife, he would rather be with her together in the underworld. Destruction tells Orpheus that he should speak with his aunt, Death. Orpheus goes to see Death in her house after Destruction showed him the way to get there. Death's house is fairly modern and suburban looking, considering it is actually ancient Greek times. Orpheus asks Death to give him back his wife. Death says she wishes she could, but she can't. She is in the underworld, in Hades' realm. In the ancient Greek religion, Hades is the king of hell, as opposed to Lucifer. Orpheus wishes to go there then, to bring her back. But Death says you can only go there when you die. And Orpheus questions Death and asks, but heroes and gods visit the underworld all the time, like Hercules. And Death responds, listen, idiot, you can't go to the underworld and come back alive. Hercules was full of it. He just got drunk for a couple weeks and told everyone he'd been to the land of the dead. Eventually, through Orpheus's persistence, Death relents, and she tells him that there is a way for him to go to hell, if that is what he truly wants. She tells him of a gate south of Hellas, and that will take him to the underworld. So Orpheus goes to where his aunt told him, and he enters into hell. And a man with a ferry rows him across the river Styx. And as the man is rowing, he asks Orpheus to play his instrument for him that he is carrying. Orpheus has a special ability when it comes to music and singing. So Orpheus obliges and sings and plays, and the ferryman begins to weep. Orpheus, he then journeys through a whole bunch of other dead people, and all the dead people look like pale ghosts. And Orpheus eventually walks through them until eventually arriving to meet Hades and Persephone, the king and queen of hell. Orpheus convinces them through song to grant his wish about returning his wife to him. And Hades was so moved by the song, he agreed. But there is a catch, there are rules. Hades tells Orpheus he must walk back to the world above, which is quite far, many hundred leagues away. And Eurydice, his wife, will silently follow him from behind. But Orpheus must not look back the entire journey with her until he reaches the surface and is out of hell. Orpheus agrees, and he walks and walks and walks. He almost makes it to the exit, but just as he sees daylight ahead, his suspicion that he has been tricked by Hades and is walking alone starts to creep into his mind. So Orpheus, he looks back, and he sees his wife. She was there. But because Orpheus looked at her before leaving hell, he failed, and she disappears. Orpheus, he then reaches the surface. He has left hell, and he falls to his knees and screams, "No!" He has lost to Eurydice for a second time. Many years go by, and Orpheus now has a streak of gray in his hair. He is still saddened about his wife being dead, and Orpheus's mother Calliope talks with him. She explains that her and Morpheus have separated. They had an argument after Orpheus went to the underworld. Calliope says, the gods of the underworld respect and sometimes fear Morpheus, and she believes that Morpheus should have helped his son Orpheus out. She explains that she is no longer speaking to him, and Orpheus, he is also not speaking to Morpheus as well. Orpheus asks his mother if she still loves him, and she answers, "I do not know. I do not think so." And Orpheus asks, "Is that my fault?" And Calliope answers, "It's been coming for a long time. He cannot share anything, any part of himself. I thought I could change him, but he does not change. He will not. Perhaps he cannot." Calliope warns Orpheus that he should leave this place soon. He will be hurt if he stays. A group of women called the Bacchanti are coming. They are dangerous. They are sisters of the frenzy, and they are coming here. Orpheus, depressed, says he does not care, he is staying. Calliope leaves. Eventually, these Bacchanti women show up. They are out of Greek mythology, and they are like this insane cult of women, all crazy and insane and in a constant state of frenzy, and they run around naked with weapons, and eventually they devour Orpheus from head to toe, biting him and ripping off his limbs. At the end of it, all that is left of Orpheus is his still living head. Morpheus eventually finds what's left of his son on a beach, and Morpheus says that he has come to tell his son goodbye. And Orpheus, who is now just this sad, pathetic head, asks his father to kill him, please. But Morpheus refuses. He points out that Orpheus had told him that he was no longer his son when he wouldn't bring Eurydice back from the dead. Morpheus then leaves, and he leaves Orpheus there to live out the rest of his life as this head on this beach. And Morpheus tells his son, "We shall not meet again," and he walks away. Orpheus yells out to his dad, "Father, come back! Please, Father!" Morpheus, he could really hold a grudge back then. Orpheus one time tells his dad, "You are not my father," one time, and now Morpheus won't end his son's suffering. Issue 40, Convergence, the Parliament of Rooks. We see Leta Hall and her infant son, Daniel Hall, whom Morpheus claims is now his child because Leta Hall was pregnant so long in the dreaming and Daniel gestated there. Leta puts Daniel to bed one night in his crib, and Daniel, he climbs out of the crib, and he walks, and because he has this connection to the dreaming, we see little Daniel Hall has some powers, and Daniel walks a bit in his bedroom, and eventually he walks right into the dreaming, and he sees Gregory, Cain's gargoyle pet, and he yanks on Gregory's tail and says, "Doggy." Daniel walks further into the dreaming and eventually meets Matthew the Raven, as well as Eve the Raven Woman. Eve is actually the Eve from the biblical story of Adam and Eve, just as how Cain and Abel are also figures from the Bible. Eve picks the child up, and she walks him up the steps of the House of Secrets into Abel's home. And there they all look at little baby Daniel Hall and they talk. Daniel sees Abel's gargoyle pet named Goldie, and Abel, he brings out some food and refreshments, and Cain eventually joins them, and they have themselves a little tea party, and each of them take turns telling a story. First, Cain. Cain's story is about this mysterious thing called the Parliament of Rooks. A whole bunch of birds, they gather around one lone bird and they stare at that lone bird for hours. And that lone rook will caw and caw, almost as if it is on trial or speaking, until all the other rooks either suddenly take flight as one, leaving the lone rook in the field, or again as one, they peck the lone rook to death. It is a mystery though. Why do the birds do this? Eve, she tells a story of Adam and his 3 wives. Lilith was the first wife. She was powerful, intelligent. She was Adam's equal. During sex, she insisted on being on top, a position of equality, superiority perhaps. That was too much though. Women were below men in biblical times, of course. So she was cast out of the Garden of Eden. The second wife was given no name. Adam was awake when God created her, and he saw her bones and blood and secretions, and it totally grossed him out as God was like putting her together. And when she was finished, Adam was so grossed out he was like, nah, no thanks. And that was pretty much the end of her. So then God made Eve, and this time God put Adam to sleep so he wouldn't be grossed out. And God stole one of Adam's ribs, and with that rib he made Eve, and the rest is history. Abel's story is about the beginnings of death and dream. And Abel, when telling the story, because Daniel Hall is a baby, he simplifies the events and makes the characters look like children, and thereby creating a Lil version of all the characters. So we see Lil Morpheus and Lil Death here. Cain, critiquing his brother's story, says, "Children? Death and Morpheus didn't even look remotely human. None of us did back then. What are you trying to feed the child? Sanitized pablum? Lil Death and Lil Morpheus, revolting." And Abel tells his brother, "This is my story, Cain, leave me alone." Abel continues the story. So in the early days when Dream and Death were building their realms, they both offered Abel a spot in their realms, and he asked what would he do there. And Morpheus told him, "I'd give you a little house and a job. You would tell stories." And Abel liked that, so he went with Morpheus. And Abel got a lovely house to live in, and a letter of commission. But Abel got kinda lonely, and one day he wanted a friend. So Morpheus invited his brother Cain to move in as well. And then Abel and Cain and Morpheus all lived happily ever after. Now that they all finished their stories, Matthew the Raven asks, "Look, can I ask a dumb question? All this biblical stuff, I mean, how true is it? Are you guys the real Cain and Abel? Are you the real Eve? And I mean, how does it all tie in with the caveman and dinosaurs and all that shit?" Abel explains, "Oh, this wasn't on Earth." Cain tells his brother to shut up. He's ruining the mystery. From this, we are supposed to infer that Cain and Abel aren't necessarily the Cain and Abel from the Bible first, but perhaps they are a recurring pattern of murder and victim that surface throughout time and space, and they are almost as old as the universe itself. Cain says to Abel, "Next thing you'll be telling the truth about the Parliament of Rooks, and what the mystery behind it is." Matthew asks, "You mean you know what the deal with all the birds is?" And Cain answers, "Of course he knows, but he won't tell you." After all the stories are done, Eve walks Daniel home. She's heading back to his bedroom, and Matthew the Raven is with her. Before they head off too far though, Abel pops his head out of the window in the house, and he explains what the Parliament of Rooks really is though. He says it's not a parliament or a trial. The rook in the middle of the field is telling a story. That's what he's doing when he is cawing. And when the rook finishes the story, it finds out if the rest of the birds liked the story or not. If they like it, they'll fly away, and if they didn't like it, they'll peck the bird to death. Cain is furious at Abel for revealing the mystery of the story, so he kills him. He tells his brother, "I keep telling you, it's the mystery that endures, not the explanation." A good mystery can last forever. The issue ends with Daniel back home in his crib, safely with his mom, although Daniel brought back a feather with him from the dreaming world. Issue 50, Distant Mirrors, Ramadan. This issue is one of the most popular in all the Sandman series. Many people consider it their favorite, and is definitely up there for me as well. The artwork is also especially beautiful. It is the Islamic holy month of Ramadan. For those unfamiliar with it, Ramadan is observed by Muslims worldwide as a month of fasting, prayer, reflection, and community, a commemoration of Muhammad's first revelation. This issue follows Caliph Harun al-Rashid. He is the leader, or the king, of the city of Baghdad, which at this point in time was the jewel of Arabia, a city of marvels, of wonders. Ambassadors from the ends of the earth would come to Baghdad, and they would return to their kings and say that they have seen a perfect city, and their kings be envious that their own cities do not compare to Baghdad, the jewel of cities. Caliph Harun al-Rashid, he had everything he could ever want. He was king. He had concubines from every land, magicians, astrologers, enchanters, poets, musicians. He had them all. He was a wise king, and the city and the people prospered. But Harun was troubled, though. His wife would offer to comfort his troubles in her breasts and smooth away his darkness between her thighs. Harun thanked his wife, but he declined her offer. Harun one day decided to take some action. So he took the golden key from around his neck, and he descended into the depths of his palace. He came upon a door of black iron, and with the gold key he opened it and continued downward. He walked on and entered another door, this one of bronze, and had green copper and inset with pearls. He opened the door with the key, and he went down some more. The next door was wood, and he had to crawl to get there, and he had to open it with the gold key as well. He walked by his room of diamonds, rubies, emeralds, sapphires, and pearls. He walked through another room filled with enchanted swords. He walked by another room with lamps and rings. And he walked through another room that contained nothing but eggs. Some of the eggs were small, and some were massive. There was also the egg of the phoenix, and when a phoenix died, it laid 2 eggs, one white and one black. And from the white egg hatched the phoenix bird itself when its time has come. No one knows what hatches from the black egg. Harun then passed through the door of fire. The only thing in this room was a glass ball resting on a satin pillow. Harun picked up this glass ball, and he walked through some secret passages in his palace, and he got all the way up to the roof, and the night sky was lit up, and it hung with stars and blazing fireballs. Baghdad even had a beautiful sky at night. Then Harun, he tried to summon Morpheus. He wanted to talk with him, talk to the King of Dreams, the Prince of Stories, the Sleeping Marches. Morpheus does not arrive, though, when Harun calls him. So Harun, with that glass ball, he threatens to chuck it to the ground and break it. He says, "In my hands I hold the globe of Solomon ben Daoud, king of the Hebrews. It was in this globe, near the end of his life, that he imprisoned 9,009 Ifrits, jinn, and demons. These were the darkest of spirits, the greatest and the most powerful. And one by one, he bound them in this crystal globe and sealed it with his seal. That was nearly 2,000 years ago. And over the years, these creatures, their hearts blacker than jet, have been imprisoned, and they each have sworn a mighty oath to wreak vengeance on the children of Adam, our father, to destroy our work and our minds and our dreams." So Harun is threatening to throw this globe of glass off the roof where it will shatter on the ground and all of these beasts inside will emerge. So Harun, tired of waiting, he throws it off, and that glass globe is hurtling towards the ground. Morpheus finally arrives, though, and he catches the glass globe ball. Morpheus tells Harun, "You have summoned me and I have come." Morpheus, he disappears the glass ball into his robe. Morpheus asks why he was summoned here. Harun says he wishes to make a bargain. First, he wants to show Morpheus around his spectacular city of Baghdad. So Harun calls for his servants to bring him his magic carpet. The magic carpet arrives. Harun and Morpheus, they then travel around the city on that magic carpet. And the city is beautiful, and there are many wonders. And then they fly down to the market, and they see the many people and goods there on sale. And Harun buys some grapes from a vendor, and eats some and offers some to Morpheus. Harun asks Morpheus what he thinks of this city, and Morpheus comments it is a wonderful place. Harun asks Morpheus if he wishes to buy it from him. Morpheus answers, "I have no desire to be king of any mortal land." And Harun responds, "No, you misunderstand me. This is the greatest city that Allah, may he be praised, from the rising of the sun in the morning until the setting of the sun in the evening, and also in the nighttime and in the hours before dawn, has seen fit with which to bless the world. And this age is the perfect age. How long can it last? How long will people remember? I have seen the world, Dream King. I have ridden through the deserts and seen the rocks, and old walls and statues breathed up by the desert wind in the empty wastes of sand. And then the wind and the sand come up once more, and the remnants of cities and palaces and gods vanish for another age of man, forgotten and unremembered. This is as good as it's going to be, isn't it?" And Morpheus answers, "It may be so for Baghdad." Harun responds, "But Allah alone knows all indeed." Harun, he is afraid that Baghdad will not last the test of time. It will fall like all other great cities at some point fall. But he wants it to be preserved the way it is right now. He tells Morpheus he wishes Baghdad, the way it is right now, to be preserved in dreams. He wishes Morpheus to take it into his dream world. And Morpheus asks, what does Harun want in exchange? And he answers, "I want it to never die, to live forever. You can do this thing?" And Morpheus says he can. Harun asks, "Okay, so what needs to happen now? Is there a spell you must do?" And Morpheus tells Harun, "All you need to do is tell your people. They follow you after all, and yours is the dream." So Harun says, "Very well." He goes into the market square, and he's standing atop the fountain there. And he pronounces to his people, "Hear, my people, I, your Caliph Harun al-Rashid of the Hashimi bloodline, proclaim on this day, in this place, that I have given the golden age of Baghdad, of Arabi, to this one who stands by my side. It is his forever, providing that as long as mankind lasts, our world is not forgotten." The next morning, we see Harun awakening in the marketplace on a tattered carpet, and his jewel-like city now appears rather muted and ordinary. As he walks back to his palace, he comes across Morpheus, whom he no longer recognizes. And he sees that Morpheus is carrying the most magical city to ever exist on Earth, housed within a bottle. Dazzled, Harun asks him, "Did you construct it? Is it for sale?" And Morpheus replies, "I did not construct it. It was given to me, and it is no longer for sale." Harun stares at it, and then, without consciously knowing why, he leaves, feeling utterly happy and fulfilled. We jump to current-day Baghdad. It is worn, torn, and bombed. A boy in ragged clothes is listening to the story of Caliph Harun al-Rashid and how he sold the old city of Baghdad. The boy has more questions to the man that is telling him the story, but the man telling him the story demands more coin, which the boy does not have. So the man tells the boy, "Well then, you have heard enough for today. Come back tomorrow and perhaps I will tell you more." The boy, he walks home, across the bombed sites and rubble of Baghdad. His stomach hurts as he is hungry, but his head is held high as he thinks of the other Baghdad, the one with towers and jewels and gin and carpets and rings and wild afrits, kings and princes, and the cities of brass. And the boy praises to Allah that somewhere in the darkness of dreams abides that other Baghdad. And that is the end of the volume. All right, so that was Fables and Reflections. Let me go through the various individual stories in this volume and I'll give my thoughts. So, firstly, Fear of Falling, I thought was kind of a throwaway tale, very short, hard to make much of an impact, although I did kind of like that message that sometimes when you fall, you fly. So, a little bit of a hopeful way to end that story. Three Septembers in a January, I thought was really fun. The fact that there was this guy that called himself the Emperor of the United States, and he's a real guy, and that was what he believed. And I thought he had a very interesting story to learn. And when we mix the Endless in here and Morpheus and everyone, it is very fun. So this was just a very fun issue. Next was Thermidor. That was the one dealing with the French Revolution. I didn't particularly love that issue. I'm not very knowledgeable about the French Revolution, so I had a hard time getting into that one. The Hunt, I thought, was interesting. I liked the relationship of the grandfather and the granddaughter and their back and forth. I thought the ending moral of the story, where sometimes you really want something, and when you finally get it, you realize you didn't really want it all that much, was an interesting takeaway to get from that story. And I enjoyed the ending where the grandfather sort of says that he was vassally in the story. That's a good little twist to end that one on. So I did like it. August, I didn't really love. That was the one set in ancient Rome. I thought it was a little bit convoluted and confusing about how this emperor wants to hide from the gods, so he becomes this beggar. Although I did find it interesting that Julius Caesar perhaps raped his grandnephew, so that was something interesting, but not my favorite story in here. Soft Places I thought was interesting. The concept of how explorers, when they're exploring the world in these unknown areas, they may get lost. So what happens to them? Well, they go into the soft places. So that was kind of a cool concept, and how time is fluid in these soft places. So there were aspects of it I liked, although aspects of it were a little bit high concept and convoluted a bit, but not too bad. The Song of Orpheus, I really enjoyed. I liked the wedding. That was immense fun. And seeing all the Endless there coming together, seeing Destruction with his big beard and his costume of metal was cool. And we had Orpheus going to hell, and his journey in hell was pretty interesting. And the sad ending we got, where Morpheus leaves his son's head on that beach and doesn't end his life. So a really interesting issue that it sort of explores Morpheus and how kind of uncaring he was in the past. The Parliament of Rooks story I thought was okay. I do like spending time with Cain and Abel and seeing their house. I thought it was interesting Eve and getting that story of Adam and Eve and his two other wives, which I never really heard of before, which I guess is some people's interpretation of the Bible, that he had these extra wives. So I thought that was an interesting thing to kind of learn about. Daniel Hall, seeing him kind of seep into the dream world is pretty good, and we're setting stuff up for the future with him, so that's not bad. On the whole, though, the final issue, though, was probably my favorite in this one. Ramadan, I thought was very good, very beautiful, the artwork. I liked the font choices as well, looked very cool. And the overall story of this king that sells this Baghdad, that is this fantastical Baghdad, the kind of Baghdad you would see in an Aladdin movie or something, with flying carpets and jewels and everything, and he sells it to Morpheus to live on in dreams, was a very interesting take on a story. Just, man, Ramadan is a very, very trippy, cool, interesting issue. I loved it. So, Certain issues in this volume I would probably give a 9 or 10 out of 10, but other issues I liked less. So on average, I would give this volume an 8 out of 10. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be back in the future with volume 7.